Hey, good afternoon, guys. Sorry for the late start. I had some technical difficulties, but hello and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight series presented by the Black Podcasters Association, where twice a week we shine a spotlight on a Black podcaster, creative, or podcast support professional from our online community. My name is Corey Gums, and I'm the founder as well as your host. Before we get started, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. If you're watching this on any other platforms, please make sure you like and subscribe as well. And to help support us to keep creating content like this, please buy us a coffee. You can find the links for our social media for the buy us a coffee, as well as some other information about the Black Podcasters Association in our description. So without further ado, we're going to get started. In today's episode, we would like to welcome the host of the Black Men Cry 2 podcast, Catherine Buccello, or is it Buccello?
Buccello. So close, so close.
Okay, sorry. Catherine is a brand architect, content creator, event curator, and social justice mental health advocate based right here in my hometown of Queens, New York. She's known for her vibrant hair and outlandish personality, and Catherine is committed to diversifying corporate communities and advocating for self-expression. Now, I know there's a lot more to your story, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you the floor and just start with who you are and how you got into podcasts and what your podcast is about.
Thank you for having me first and foremost. I truly appreciate this. Um, a little bit about my journey. I got into podcasting in 2019, and at first I didn't technically want to do a podcast because I knew that it was saturated, so to speak, but with the content that I wanted to curate, I was like, well, this needs to be heard. And it wasn't mainly about me, it was the stories that I was learning from my Black male friends, the Black men that I was dating, and it kind of gave me an eye opener to the insight of like your lives and what you guys go through that isn't highlighted enough. So the reason why I decided to go into podcasting was to tell their stories, tell your stories, give a platform where you can see, well, I'm biracial, but a Black woman sitting next to a Black man and having these taboo conversations around their life experiences and mental health, something that we don't talk about enough in our community or highlight enough in our community, the actual triumphs, traumas that we go through. And I wanted to do it a little differently. So it's the reason why it's a web series first, because I want people to identify and see these men, see that, like, oh, he grew up the same way I grew up, or he looks like me, he sounds like me, he talks like me, he has interests like me. This is me on screen. I can finally see myself being represented. And in the midst of doing it as a web series, I also wanted to connect and highlight other Black owned brands. So like my shirt today I've worn on the show. Like I always wear Black owned brands on the show to further propel and expose different Black brands, because if we ain't gonna do it, who gonna do it?
Right. Okay.
So
So I guess what is for people who haven't heard your podcast or your it's a web based and a podcast, right?
yes.
Web based show and copy. Okay. Can you talk more about that and how you got got that idea and how you really got started with that? Like what was the journey to that path?
I didn't realize I was kind of on that journey since I was in high school. My freshman year of high school, I lost a male best friend to suicide. Didn't see it coming. And they talk about the signs, but when you're 14, can you really identify certain signs at 14, especially if you haven't been taught or exposed, or if this isn't something that you've spoken about? So that was my first initial experience into the mental health struggles and holds that it can have on men of color. Um, my second personal experience. So the reason why I started the podcast was very, very personal to me, to everything that I've been through, to everything that I've witnessed and experienced. My second experience was I was in a mutually abusive relationship. We were both suffering from depression and abusing vices together. So that little combination didn't mix well. I get another first front row seat. And the last situation that occurred was in 2019, months before I decided this is exactly what I want to do. I was in a situationship, as many of us, especially in New York, end up in. And in that situationship, he is a stoic man who's very respected and feared in his neighborhood. But whenever we were hanging out, it's I'm watching you cry, you're telling me your deepest fears and insecurities and this traumatic like a life experience and upbringing that you've experienced that you don't share or you feel like hid for a really long time. And it was during that time period where there were other male friends that were going through other traumatic events, whether it be, miscarriage in their relationship or anything else, just coming to terms or coming to grips with generational curses that they were trying to break, or just recognizing or extreme depression and anxiety. And it took me in that moment to decide that I wanted to create a safe space for Black men, but also for Black women as well. Like, we also play a part too. We don't want to admit it. No one ever wants to admit that they play a part. But what part do we play? How can we change that part? How can we have a healing ground for our Black community across, whether it's in romantic relationships? What can we do differently so we don't repeat the same vicious cycles? Whether it's in platonic relationships, like how can we show up as a friend for a friend?
Mhm.
So through all of those experiences, when I started recognizing a trend that Black men were becoming comfortable sharing their truths with me, is when I decided to create hashtag Black Men Cry Too, which is an invitation for men of color to feel safe to share their truth and unpack their hurt and let them know that it's okay that they can cry too. I kind of wanted to give back to them since there was a big push around Black women healing and in therapy. What about our Black men? We got to remember our Black men too.
Right. Gotta do it both together in order for it to actually work, so I get it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, how has the response been? I know well, let me ask it's a two-part question, so let me ask first, how has the response been for getting Black men to come on the show and open up and talk about it? 'Cause I know that's very difficult. Even myself included when I was, a while back, I finally had to admit to myself, went to therapy and stuff, but to still talk about it openly, it's like it's very complicated for a lot of people. So how do you get the guys that come on the show or, your guests that come on the show to open up and talk about what they went through or going through?
That's a really great question. And I don't have like sometimes some people will come to me and be like, "Well, how do you get this person to open up?" And it's like, "Well, I don't have a cheat sheet for you."
Right.
But it also comes down to what type of environment are you setting for people? And that's why I always want to ensure that, like, when you come on to the show, we build rapport first, making sure that I can do a temperature checking, see their comfort rate, reading their energy, and ensuring that my energy is in check. So it
Mhm.
always like starts with you. You're the one that's giving them the experience. They're the ones coming to your platform, so they're already giving you that initial trust. So how do you earn their trust? Running through it with them, like asking them first and foremost, like, these are the questions. This is the way that I would like this conversation to go. I don't follow like strict questions as well because I want them to talk freely, but I also want them to talk freely on what they feel comfortable and ready to speak about. So I never want to feel like I'm pushing anyone if they feel out of their comfort zone. I have asked a few people in the beginning stages that weren't comfortable as yet to speak. There was one I have a trainer and I wanted him to come on the show for season 2 and he wasn't ready. And then at one point after season 2 wrapped up, he hit me up like, "All right, when are we doing this? Like, I need to do this. We need to get this out now. I need to tell my truth. I need to talk about it." So it's also always having that open door policy as well. If you feel ready to share your truth and you feel passionate enough to tell your story, like, I'm here to receive it. But I've also have been blessed where when I first had the idea, I ran it past 5 males first that I knew had those type of conversations and did it as a tester. So the first 5 episodes were the first 5 men that I thought of that said yes. From there, I've built my network. I've had people reach out to me. I've even had people reach out to me that's been on the show that want to come back on. So that's been like a super blessing. And ironically, what's also helped unfortunately, ironically, because it is a sad situation, of course, and especially to me because I am a big fan, losing Kobe right during the week that I released that I was dropping this project
Right.
definitely encouraged more Black men to openly talk about their feelings as well as grieving openly. So seeing that this was another platform and another outlet for them and them connecting with the actual material, I think has definitely helped. in my case, to get more Black men to be like, I want to come on, or I'm ready to talk, or I would love to like tell my share, or tell my story that I've been holding on for 30 plus years.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that week Kobe was hard. I was sitting in Starbucks coding, and I was like, "What?" People were like, everybody in the store was just going crazy, and I was like, "What? No, that's not real." And then sat there for like a good few minutes. So,
I
but
was
I
really hoping
guess
it wasn't
things
real.
happen for a reason because that kind of led some of those guys to open up to you during that week and stuff. So, unfortunately, sometimes that's how things go. But
Yeah.
the other part of the question I have is how has the response been from your audience in regards to the show?
That was honestly the most nerve-wracking piece for me to release it when it came time to being like, "Okay, I'm gonna release this project now, guys." I didn't know if I was gonna receive backlash on 3 different accords. The first accord, of course, being those that are very resistant and that do have that toxic masculinity. It's like, "Oh my gosh, everyone's gonna go against it and say, 'Why are we talking about this?'" But I only ran into that situation once, but by the time I ran into that situation, I was already mentally prepped for it because I was preparing for this war in my head for some reason that
Mhm,
everyone was gonna be resistant for the material. So by the time it came, it was so easy to overcome and just work through in that moment, and that it didn't even stick with me because I was able to see the more positive, responses that I was receiving. Another response that I was nervous about was the fact that I have a podcast called Black Men Cry Too, but I don't have a Black father. I am biracial. My father is white. And to also jump ahead of that, in the first season, as my bonus episode, I sat down with him and I interviewed him. Like, how does it feel to be married to a Black woman, to have Black daughters? And asking all of those questions that, well, if you're gonna sit there and try to develop that conversation on your own in the background to go against what's supposed to be a beautiful platform, well, I have the answers right here in front of you. So you don't have to worry about speculations. They're all right there in the open.
mm,
And that has been one of the most well-received episodes that I put out there as well, because it's the art of vulnerability as well as the art of transparency. If I'm telling people to be vulnerable and transparent with me, I have to do that for myself as well and put
right.
myself out there as an example. So I believe with preparing for those 2, and then, of course, just anyone assuming the 3rd one would be if anyone was assuming I'm doing this as a pick me. Like, I'm still single 2 years later doing this platform, so clearly not doing this as a pick me. But, with that as well, I've also noticed there are women that are just they wanna learn. They wanna learn so they can be better mothers to their sons. They wanna learn to be better lovers to their partners. So it has been a very positive response. The only one thing that I always need to iron out is I'm not an expert in this space. Like, I'm
Right.
not a licensed mental health counselor, but because of this platform, I've built that network up so much that I can be like, go to this person, or maybe you would have interest in this person, this event, have you looked at these resources? And I connect that with every episode that I release. I release 3 new resources that can help the Black community when it comes to their own healing journey. Like, I just want this to be a kickstarter for your healing journey. This isn't where you're coming to fully heal. It's just a form of healing.
Um, 2 things I wanna point out. You said transparency, and I think, we as podcasters, I think that's the allure of podcasting is that it's a connection between the host or the hosts, plural, and their audience and the transparency that can happen there. So I think that's very important, especially in topics like this. I did notice on your website that you had resources and different resources for different types of things. So I thought that was really cool too. And the idea that you release 3 new resources with your episodes. So it's almost like, yeah, we're having this conversation, but here I'm not just having a conversation, I'm also
Right.
offering those who may be watching or who can relate a solution. So, and I think that's really big because in these conversations, I worked in development to disability psych for 10 years, so I
Mhm.
understand how all this stuff goes. But sometimes the hardest part is knowing where to start, or
Mhm.
most people don't think, hey, let me just call my insurance company if they have insurance and just ask them who can I go to, right? So it's
Right.
good that you're bringing the plate with the meal, right? You're giving them and saying, hey, yeah, here we are having this conversation, but also here, if this is you, I have it for you so you can get started and get started on your healing process now. So I think that's very important. Um, this is a little sidebar because we're like in a right now we're like in the middle of like a to me personally, what I've seen like going on in social media, this whole black man versus black woman war.
Mm.
How does your where and I know that your podcast doesn't go in it, but how does your podcast solve this problem? Because somebody sees that name, and if they're caught up in these rhetorics or these ideologies that's being espoused, through YouTube or through social media, somebody sees that name, they might automatically become defensive or aggressive toward. Aggressive is not the right word, but that's the one I can think of.
Well, sometimes people can
Towards,
be. So yeah, it could be a good word.
towards that name and and refuse to just check out the show and realize that it's big. It's deeper than just the name that you have for your show. How do you think you how do you think you can address that or help bridge that um bridge what's the word bridge it bridge that differences between our communities to help everybody heal and come together and realize we're all in this struggle together.
Oh, ooh, that's a really good question, and I think I sometimes reflect on that personally when I do see those type of dialogues coming up because I'm my own person,
Mhm.
and me being my own person, I'm also the host of this platform. So sometimes I have to like be cautious of certain things I say or engage with, but sometimes I even tell people if you see me talking like blah 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 ain't ish. It's like the person I'm dealing with at the moment ain't ish. I'm not saying this as collectively or this isn't my personal feelings against the whole community. This is just what I'm personally going through at the moment because I'm my own person as well. But when it comes down to people not being receptive because of the name or using it as part of a bait in this war that we make up, in a sense there's content for everyone, and if we keep preaching that we want to see representation, we want to see inclusiveness, we don't see content like this often. So I'm not trying to be baited in this war. This is how I'm help bridging this gap, because then you get to see yourself in this, you get to see these are some conversations that some friends are having, some people are having, people in our community are having, but not enough people in the community are having. So if you're seeing more and more people in the community changing the way that these conversations are had, instead of playing the blame game, well, men do this, well, women do this, we're pointing fingers back and forth at each other, but there's truth behind when we're pointing these fingers. Women, do we have a tendency to start off our arguments with, you always this, you always that? Well, we're already shutting down because we're being defensive or we're pointing blame and we're not expressing ourselves. Or men, are you having a hard time expressing yourself with your partner? Where is that coming from? Like, this should help highlight what are the problems on both sides in the community, because again, we do both play parts, and it's not like we woke up one day and it's like, well, me as a black woman, I'm just going to create this problem today. It's like, no, me as a black woman, this is what I've seen in the household, this is what I've seen in my family, this is what I'm accustomed to, but I know it doesn't work. So what can I do to change that? And it's not always going to be received well, but just because you tried something new and you're breaking a mentality that we've had in our community and it's not received well with the person that you've tried it with, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, see, men don't want it. No, this is just one person who isn't there yet. But if you keep practicing and staying true to who you are, or like learning from our past, learning from history, taking those changes within yourself, then other people can see that and maybe want to start practicing that change, because you're going to see a different output, a different outcome. This is what we're all striving and thriving for. It's different outcomes, peaceful outcomes, happier outcomes,
Yeah.
healthier outcomes. So we have to start practicing that within ourselves. So I just do it more so as, well, what's the responsibility factor that I can do for me? How can I show up for my friends differently? If you're going to vent, I'm going to let you vent, and then I'm going to call out certain things. Have you considered this? Or I caught this? Or what about this? I'm not trying to place blame on anybody. Well, maybe if you did this, or see, you keep doing that, like changing that narrative within myself and even doing that within the platform. And if you feel like you don't want to, or this platform isn't for you, then maybe it isn't. And maybe it isn't your time as yet. Like, everyone has time to receive certain material. And if you're not at a time, it's almost like going to therapy and not being open to it. Now you're wasting your own time because you're very resistant to your own healing tools. But the time that you're ready to receive, it's going to be a game changer. So we're still going to be here. We're going to be waiting for you when you're ready to receive. We're not going to go anywhere.
Right.
we're trying to help change. And in trying to help change, we'll just be here ready and waiting for whoever is ready to take that next step.
Okay. Thank you for that. How do you determine your content? Like with the subject you're going to talk about, is that something that a guest comes to you with? Is it something that you have an idea and you see who fits in it, or is it just I don't want to say random because nothing we really do as podcasters is random, but is it just something that you say, okay, somebody might say something to you and you're like, you know what, that'll be a good conversation, and let me find somebody who can join me in that conversation. How's your process go for determining your topics that you talk about?
I think it's a good mixture, honestly. There are certain topics. So for season 2 specifically, I did want to speak about it was during the Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. So I did have a lot of conversations about those that were frontline protesters or creating or have been involved in other organizations and movements like closing Rikers. So I know those were conversations I specifically wanted to have because it was during the height of everything. There was someone in my network who his episode is going to be released in 2022 around protecting Black women because that was another big trend as well. So there are certain trend conversations that I do look to have, and I look for, well, who's a good person who can speak to it based on their experiences and not just, oh, well, this is my opinion. I really want people who can speak on their experience because we can all have an opinion, but what have you lived through? What can you literally talk to?
Mhm.
And then there's sometimes where there could be guests that say, they want to come on the show, but maybe they don't know what they want to speak about specifically. And I try to do my own like research on, okay, what are they passionate about? What have they spoke about in the past? What topics do I want to speak about that I can like bring out more learning information from? Because I want every episode for people to walk away with like an aha. Like, what did you gain from this episode? Did you get a new perspective? Did you get more insight? That's always my goal for each and every episode is to highlight a new perspective that you can reflect upon internally or with your whoever you guys speak to on a daily. Um,
Right.
so that's typically how I work out who's coming on and what are we speaking about. And if someone presents something to me and I don't feel comfortable speaking on it, then I try to tailor it where how can I meet them in the middle where you can still speak about this even if I don't have knowledge on it at all or if I don't feel the most confident having this dialogue.
Okay. That's I hope people that are watching learn and listen, because I think one of the most important things that I try to work with my clients is what is the outcome? What are you looking to gain from this conversation that you're having? What do you want people to walk away with? And I think in regards to the subject matter you're talking about, I think that's very important. I mean, there's an overall theme right here that, we need to have these conversations in a safe space for black men. But then there's a smaller themes or outcomes or goals, um, where you want people to be able to walk away and say, and ideally organically share it with people who they think it will help. So I think
Exactly.
that's important as well. Um, I know that, so this is the only podcast you've worked on, or have you ever had experience doing it outside of this? Or is this your first time actually putting together a project like this and actually executing it?
From A to Z, this is my first time. I've been on others, I've supported other friends with theirs, but to have an idea, talk it out, throw it past people, do a test to market, create the content, find people to help me with the content. First time I've ever taken on a project like this to this accord. I don't regret any of it. It's a beautiful journey, but it is a time consuming journey, and you really do have to think a lot of things out to ensure that you are speaking to the audience. Like, this isn't just a passion hobby for me. If I'm using this as a tool for others, I have to make sure that it is presented as such, and that can take some tender love and care.
Right. So, because we have in our community, we have a lot of people of different levels. So, like, be your advice to someone who's looking to get started, in the space as a podcaster, especially as a black podcaster? Because I'm finding and talking with people in our community, I'm finding that our journey is similar to a lot of our counterparts, but it's also different. So,
Mhm.
can you say like, what advice you would give, and how has that been for you? Do you find yourself some of the information that you've learned along the way from, I guess, from outside in other podcasters or other podcast communities, has it been in line with you being a black woman or you coming from the black community? Or do you find that there's a difference in sometimes an approach and how we relate information?
I feel like there's always a difference when it comes to the Black community, when it comes to different approaches, as well as not only your approach, but your purpose there as well. I think my biggest advice that I say to anyone when it comes to anything is understanding your why. Because if you don't understand why you're doing this, then why should I buy into you? Why should I continue to tune in? Like, what am I here for? So if you can't understand what it is that you want to give to people, no matter what it is, it can be a lighthearted podcast, it can be a podcast around pop culture, but what is your why? Do you have a unique spin to it? Do you really feel passionate about this topic? Do you really just enjoy it? That needs to be translated well, because if you don't have that understanding within yourself, it can become very chaotic and confusing to others. And we're already considered last. So if you want to scale this and make this into an actual business, you need to have all the answers to the questions that anyone would be asking you at any time point. Are you asking people to give you money? Are you asking people to sponsor? Are you asking people to subscribe? Give them the why, like give them the answers to the questions that they didn't even know they had inside of them. I
Right.
didn't know if people would be receptive to this. I didn't know if this is what people would want. But in asking those questions and talking and engaging with your community, which is also another big thing that I would say is talking and engaging with your community. You don't know what people are looking for or what part of your process people maybe connect with the most unless you ask and learn from them. They're going to be the ones that are going to help you grow. It's not going to be these companies. They don't care. These companies are literally just looking for who can they stand next to that will help their pockets grow,
Mhm.
which is also fine if you're just looking for a quick cash or a come up. I'm not judging anyone's journey, but that part as well is also aligning with, are you aligning with people that make sense to you? If you're a women-based podcast talking about, I don't know, painting your toenails. I don't know why that's the first thing that came to my mind, but it is. And if Manscaped comes to you and they're like, "We want you to do this code on Manscaped," which is a product for men, and you're using this, there's no connection. Like, you're showing me that you don't care about, not that you don't care about, what it is that you're doing, but you're just showcasing that you don't understand the why or the connection or the alignment of your brand. So it's really just understanding your brand first and foremost, and why you wanna put this content out there, and why do you think people would care about your content being out there? And then understanding also, are you doing this content for fun? Or are you doing this to scale? Because that's 2 different approaches as well.
Right. That is definitely, something I talk about with my clients. So, you find it's hard, to answer that question sometimes. Sometimes you think, "Oh, my why is this," and then you realize as you dig deeper that
Mhm.
it's not as strong as you thought it was, and now you have to really revamp. I'm doing an exercise now for a project I'm working on, and I was like, "Yeah, I got this," and not, following it. And I'm like, "Yeah, I could write this out." And then I'm in the car today, and I'm like writing some things out, and I'm like, "This is harder than I thought it would be." Now, like when I'm done with this, that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my evening doing. But it is it's important that we understand out who we are, who our brand is, and who we're trying to connect to, and why we're doing this. Because, like you said, this is not easy, and you got to be able to wake up in the morning and say, I have a reason for doing this, and I have a purpose,
Mhm.
and that's what's going to keep you motivated. I know you're a brand architect as well, so you kind of went to the branding stuff. So, can you just tell people what that is? Because it is important for podcasters in general to understand branding and who they are as an individual brand within the overall brand of their podcast. Because you have the podcast and then you have the host or the
Right.
hostess or the hostesses and the guests. But you have the people involved in who are the public facing figures of the podcast as well as the podcast itself. So can you talk about what a branding podcast architect is and how why that's important to our community?
So, a brand architect, I just found a different way to essentially say that I'm a brand manager. I love curating brand experiences and brand stories and making sure that there's an understanding of brands, which is why, again, with my personal podcast with Black Men Cry Too, people have that connections. They're always going to see me wearing a Black brand. Like, that's something they know that they'll always see. So that's something that ties into me as a person that I brought into the show. So me as a person, people know that they can come to me and they're like, "Hey, I'm traveling to Portland. Do you know any? Yep. Here's all the black owned places that I've been to that I like. Love it. One time my friend was like, "Oh, she ran out of some product." And I was like, "Oh, did you know that there's a black brand now that has like toothpaste and toilet paper?" And she was like, "I feel like you know all the black brand everything." Yes, that's what I love. That's my brand. My brand is to put on more black brands because I want to see our communities excel. Um, so when it comes to brand architect and understanding your brand, when it comes to your podcast, it's your podcast needs to have its own brand identity, of course, because why are people tuning into your content consistently? Because you want consistent support. So what do they know that they can walk away from? Is it you interview certain people in a specific industry, you give insight, you give tips, you give laughs? What are people walking away from? And it doesn't mean that because you have this you need to stay to the structure. You don't need to stay to a structure, but you need to stay consistent. People know that they consistently can come here and find information or content that has to do with this or this, that, and the third. Like, I'm not coming to you and one week you're telling me how to ride a bike, and then 3 weeks later you're teaching me how to, I don't know, build a I don't even know examples anymore, but just something completely not related. Like, it
Right.
just doesn't connect, and I don't know who you are or what your interests are or what I'm connected into. Like, are you just following trends? Like, people that just follow trends and don't have their own identity throughout trends, you don't have an understanding of your brand. You're just trying to connect with anything to have people like follow and engage with you. That's not going to connect. Like, if you think about your favorite show, if you think about Issa Rae, like Issa Rae also puts on for the Black community. So, anytime you tune into Insecure, you're going to see a new Black brand that we either love or aren't aware of, and you're going to see like Black stories told by us in a sense where it feels very relatable, because think of any time you watch Insecure, everybody has gone through something that we've seen on that show because the show is made to be that relatable, and that's part of Issa's brand. So understanding your brand and the importance of having your brand is that's what people are going to buy into. They're buying into you as the host, they're buying into you as your brand and the story that you tell, and it has some form of connection to people. Like, everyone has some common interest. Cardi B loves getting her nails done. That's a part of her brand and her image. She loves her nails. So now people who are also into that can go to Cardi and be inspired by her nail designs, or she could put on for new nail tech designers. I know her nail tech in the Bronx like blew up with popularity because of Cardi, but that's what you expect. That's what you're guaranteed to receive when you go to this person. And your brand can evolve and your brand can change. It doesn't mean you have to be stuck to it. If you think about McDonald's, how many times have we seen McDonald's rebrand?
Right.
But at McDonald's, you're always going to get these specific
McDonald's.
things. Yeah, you're always gonna get these things, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it's dressed up as, no matter what changes, whether they have a new recipe, you're always gonna get fries. From the beginning of the time to now, you're gonna get fries. They're gonna be good fries depending on when you go, who makes them, etc. So that's the main importance of brand, and that's why I say it's always important to understand your why and your purpose, because why are you doing this? That's gonna tie into your brand story. Why do you want to put this material out there? Why is this material important to be out there? Why are you important to be out there? Why should people listen to you? What is it that you have to say that people should be bought into? Do you understand that? Can you articulate that? And can that be shown each and every time that you drop a new episode or you want people to subscribe and get connected to your podcast? So that's why the importance of brands within yourself as a podcast host, as well as having a brand identity for the podcast, is important, in my
Absolutely.
opinion, at least.
Nah, that's a very expert opinion. Uh, because I mean, myself and a couple other podcast producers I have are we share that same view. Not as articulate as you said it. I know I can't articulate as well as you say it, but that is definitely important that what you said, and I hope people that are watching are listening because you just gave us some jewels for free, so I really appreciate that. But we're gonna start wrapping up, but I do have a question I want to ask you. What was the hardest episode for you to do on your show? Because I know it's a very emotional, not only just emotional for the guests, but can also be emotional draining for you as well. What was the hardest show you did, and how did you what's the word I want to how did you overcome, or how did you deal with that?
Um, I'm gonna quickly say 3 episodes. Um, The first 2 were in the first season, and I had one episode. Both of these episodes were men that I was becoming closer with, like, we were becoming better friends, we were learning each other a bit more. I respect them as creatives, which is why they got on the show, but learning them as actual people behind their creative outlets
Mhm.
was very interesting and challenging, because in one of them, he had released and he said for the first time ever that he was sexually abused by someone in his family, and it was the first time he was admitting it was during recording. So, that was the first pilot episodes, and it was the first time for me to not react on screen because we were recording, not stop it, like, just continue flowing with the conversation, and not making it weird. And I'm blessed to have the team that I had there, because everyone did the same exact thing. Like, okay, he's getting very comfortable. He's releasing something very heavy and important to him. Let's just give him the floor and let's not make this weird. Because, of course, people can react, and based on people's reactions, can cause other people to retreat and shut down. Having that experience then led to an episode later down the line where I learned that another person that I was becoming friends with, like, suffered from a miscarriage in his first relationship that was also, like, an abusive relationship. So that was very personal to me, because now I'm sitting there feeling, as a woman, and if I went through this, and this is my friend who went through this, and I have another friend who just recently went through this. So my mind is gearing elsewhere, and I'm trying to stay focused and present in this conversation. But sometimes when they drop emotional baggage that you weren't prepared for, it can trigger your own emotions, and you have to stay very grounded and present for them, because this is their time to share. But it's a little hard to, like, compartmentalize live. Like, we're recording live, and you're
Right.
trying to compartmentalize what you're going through. Maybe there's someone you wanna hit up, a new thought that you had, and you just have to sit present and then dissect that later. Um, this season was this whole entire season was very challenging for me, because I unexpectedly lost my mother at the top of this year. So a lot of
Condolences.
conversations, certain things that were said would trigger, like, that grief, or trigger, like, a new thought. And I would sometimes space out for a second and have to talk myself back to being present. Like, okay, what did they just say? What's the next question you can ask? How can you gather yourself? And again, and being very transparent and also practicing my own vulnerability, this has been the first season where I've had to take pauses and, like, stop or collect myself and remember what my next question was going to be. And thankfully, having men that also were aware of what I've been through, so it's not a shock to them if they see that I need, like, a second. So just having that, it all comes down to vulnerability, transparency, and trust. So having that with the guest and practicing that, or even being open or doing the energy check-in, I think that's really what helps, like, overcome those situations, and learning how to compartmentalize. And do I want to further engage that conversation after recording, which I've done. Like, there's been follow-ups either with them or myself, just to show that you didn't just come on, talk about something heavy, and it's like, peace, good luck with your journey. It's like,
Right. Thank
no,
you.
you still
Yeah.
have a friend here, you still have a support system here, I'm still gonna check in on you. I hope you know that you can come here for any updates or questions. And literally building a community with the guests that have come on the show, like, that's how I overcome it, is I'm building a community with you, like, you're now in my circle, so.
Okay. Well, condolences on your mom. I know it's been a rough year for a lot of people, whether it's COVID related or something else, but condolences to your mom and your family. And I
Thank
know
you.
that's not easy. That's one of the things when I worked in the field, it was like sometimes you gotta learn to shut your own stuff off and help these people that you're there to help. So
Mhm.
not being trained as a professional is even harder, because you have to be self-aware of what's going on in your mind, while also keeping, I will say, I'm gonna say journalistic integrity of saying, "Okay, here we have some content going on. This is more than just content, but here I have this person who's
Right.
releasing, and I have to give them the floor, and I can't interrupt, and I can't jump in, or I can't allow it to take control of me." Which comes to my next question, and then we'll start wrapping. Because it's interesting because, like, that's one thing I like about this since I started doing this series is you start meeting different podcasters from all kind of different stories and journeys and different subject matter. And I love it because it's showing people we're not monolithic in our conversations, right? It's not
Yeah,
always about entertainment, movies, and sex
we're
and gossip and stuff.
multidimensional.
So it's good that we have these conversations because it's not only is it important for our community, but it just shows other people who might be looking to get into space, who might feel like, this is not good enough, that there are people out here who are doing it and you do have a place here somewhere. You just gotta figure it out for yourself. You gotta figure out your why, right?
Exactly.
Um, Now, because of the nature of the conversations you're having, is there a point where you as the host and as the podcast creator, you have to decide, you know what, I'm gonna edit this. This needs to be taken out, or I'm gonna leave this here. I know this was emotional. I know this is hard for a person they're putting themselves out there to the world, but I have to keep it here. Is there ever like that 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 conflict within you that you have to figure that part out?
I've done that 3 times, but in the sense of I've asked their permission. Like, "Hey, I know during the episode you spoke about this. Do you feel comfortable leaving this in?" So it's mainly if you feel comfortable speaking, and opening up, and if I believe something that you might have shared may be too personal or too heavy, I'm always going to double check and get confirmation that you consent to this content being out there, because I never want anyone to come back to me or feel regret or just feel like they weren't ready to have certain content out there. So I always want to get that consent and confirmation from them first and foremost, because I would love that grace to be done for me as well. Like, maybe I just got too comfortable and I was like, "Oh, man, actually, if you wouldn't mind, can you take that one part out? Like, I might lose my job if anyone hears that." So
Right.
it's always, like, confirming that everyone is comfortable with, because again, it's their story. Like, the platform is for you to share your story. So I wanna ensure that the story that you want out there, you're comfortable with it being out there, because you can't take it back once it's out there. But I have been thankful where, guests haven't asked me to take it out. Like, some have contemplated and then they were like, "You know what? If I felt comfortable in the moment, just put it out there." I would want that story to be shared. Like, I consent. So I'm very blessed and very thankful. Like, this podcast, this platform wouldn't be capable for me if people didn't say yes. So very, very blessed, very appreciative, and I don't take any of that for granted. But what I do also do as well for myself is, some people assume that I do this content like I record every week, and I can't do that. Like, the
Right.
conversation and the magnitude of the conversation is too heavy. And again, I'm not licensed in this space. So for me to have those type of conversations continuously so frequently, I know I wouldn't be able to handle it. Like, I'd probably be sitting in a dark room like, "Mm-mm, I'm not going outside. I don't trust anything out there. I don't have the capacity for it." So I do bulk record and then re-release the episodes that way, so I can, like, sit in my feels, I can unpack or release anything with my own therapist, and then be present and be able to continue engaging the conversation once we do release the content.
That's important as well, because that's one of the things we see with a lot of podcasters is the idea that I have to do this every week. I have to release an episode and not realizing the emotional toll it takes on you, the physical, the psychological toll it takes to deal with certain types of subject matters, right? Not just finding gossip or not just finding
Right.
if you're talking about a particular field or area, but also when you're having these raw or these really deep conversations with people, the toll is taking on you and how it can affect your performance with not only with your podcast, but your personal life, professional life, and stuff like that. So, I mean, one of my things I highly recommend people bulk record and then release if it's not something that deals with like ongoing events, but
Yeah.
because you need that time, you need that space to, not only to identify what's going on with you, but to give you time to release and deal with it in whatever capacity, whatever positive capacity you could deal with it. Because one thing I don't want anybody doing out there is rage drinking after doing a whole season, you
Or
know?
chain smoking,
Right.
like, we are not
Yeah.
responsible.
I want you guys to be, decompress positively, and do something that's gonna help you so that the next season you work on, you come back better and stronger and ready, even more prepared for your podcast than you did the previous season. I know we have Bethany, one of our moderators, she always says, your first season is your practice, and then the second season, so I think that's important that people realize that, like, I don't have to commit to doing it weekly. But since
Yeah.
we're talking about that, when do your episodes come out since you release them over time so people can know?
I do release them bi-weekly, so you'll typically only see 2, max 3 episodes per month. Again, because of the fact that it's heavy content, I don't also wanna release them back to back because maybe the content from last week was heavy for you and you're not ready to receive the next content that's available. Um, so when the seasons drop, it's a little dicey to say since we have been in COVID since I released that I've been doing this project. So I have been strategic with when we record, getting the bulk recordings and then releasing from there. But once the season is active, and this season started, I believe, in October, and it should run until probably up until March or April this year. And then from there, I'll figure out if I'm going to. I most likely will have season 4 come back sooner. I usually have month gaps in between seasons.
Okay.
But I think due to the fact that there's so many new conversations that can be had, want to be had, and should be had, that I'm going to make it a little bit sooner, but I'm still going to keep it as a bi-weekly release because of the fact that it is video content that comes out first, and the magnitude of how heavy the content is not overloading anyone's emotional state and still keeping it very engaging. So, um, I was gonna say watchers, I don't know, listeners, subscribers,
Right. Your
uh,
audience.
community, the
Right.
tribe, when they can tune in, they can still find content to tune in that is challenging of their mind, at least monthly.
Okay. So, we're gonna start wrapping up. I know I said that like 3 times, but, I mean it this time, 'cause I know, we've had you here for a while, and, I really appreciate having you here. But my last question I wanna ask you is, what does it mean for you to be a Black podcaster, but as well as a Black woman in podcasting? And what do communities like the Black Podcasters Association mean for you?
Great question. Great last question. I think being a Black woman podcaster, for me specifically, and again, this isn't when I speak about my personal opinion, it's not to put down anybody in any realm that they do. Like, I'm into, the gossip or what are celebrities doing. Like, that's just natural interest. But for me, being a Black woman podcaster, I looked at it as I want to do for the community. And in doing for the community, it's how can we finally own our stories and own our voices and use our voices so we can tell our stories. So it's not white media washing our stories, or we're only being fed the same stories over and over again. Like, I had told somebody after I watched the Janelle Monáe slave movie, I was like, I'm not watching any more slave movies, guys. Like, I'm tired. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
We've all got it. We used to be slaves. We're not slaves anymore. Like, America will make us feel like that and will constantly remind us so we can constantly have the slave mentality. I'm not doing it. I'm not subscribing to it. I don't want to watch it. I personally don't want to watch it. So, in order to not watch that and to change the content, I wanted to provide a different form of content by us. Like, this is for us and it's literally by us. This is us talking. These are the
Right.
conversations we have in our group chats. These are conversations we have when we're hanging out with our friends that don't get highlighted. We don't look like we're educated people. America would love us to continue having that mindset. So look at us talking about real life ish that we've been through, that if some of you guys went through, you might have folded. But this is our reality. So let us talk about our reality and how we're getting through it. And with associations like the Black Podcaster Association, and why it's so important is it's very important to build community because you grow within your community. You can like learn, you can get connected, and it's better to build amongst us because we all have the same mindset in mind. It's we're all here for the same thing. We all want to win. We're all here with a winning mentality. We're not in here with the crabs in a barrel mentality. Like, how many times do we see our white counterparts? This person's husband is the CEO of this company, so this person's wife is now the CFO because they just knew that person. Why can't we have that for ourselves?
Right.
And it's because we're not trained to think that way, and they don't want us to think that way. So seeing associations like this, whenever I see communities that are literally to help propel and like push the next Black excellence, I always want to find my way to be involved, because it's, what if you need a photographer and I have a dope Black photographer that's starting out and I can connect the two of you guys together? I'm not going to feel left out, because at the end of the day, it's my own people are winning for once. I don't have to sit there and be like, damn, like, why is it 2021 and we're still learning about the first Black whatever to win whatever? Like, why are we still having
Right.
first Black winners in 2021? That's crazy to me. So in order to have more of us winning in more areas, we need to come together and help each other build and help each other rise. So
All right. Well, thank you, and I'm glad to have you part of the community, and we're glad to have your support and to have you here telling us about your story and your podcast. Um, Last question is, how can people, if somebody wants to come on your show, how can they contact you, as well as where can people find your show and what your social media stuff is?
yeah, you can follow on Instagram and subscribe on YouTube at Black Men Cry Too, and that's TOO. The two O's matter. We're also on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify Podcasts, so you can listen to us on the go as well. You can send a DM if you want to get on the show. You can send an email, or you can even fill out the form on the website, blackmencry2.com. The email is blackmancry2@gmail.com. Let me know who you are, why you want to get on the show, and we'll definitely have you scheduled. Don't be alarmed if I'm like, yeah, I'm going to reach out for season 4 and months go by and then you finally hear me reaching out for season 4. Again, it's because I pre-record and then release later. So I do save everyone that is interested. I just don't reach out until it's closer to time, because we all have busy lives. So why interrupt your life if I'm not ready yet?
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Catherine. I really appreciate having you here again. The podcast is Black Men Cry Too. Make sure you guys check it out. I caught a couple of your episodes on YouTube, so I definitely highly recommend people check that out. Go to the website. Very nice website. Has a lot of information on there as well. So, thank you for this. Just gonna wrap up real quick. Thank you for checking out the spotlight. Make sure you guys tune in next for our next show coming up this Friday, December 24th at 8 p.m., where we're going to spotlight our next Black Podcaster Association member, uh, Reggie Socorro Garner, of the host of Reggie's Expressions podcast. So thank you again, guys. And guys, if I don't speak to you guys before that, or if you guys don't return before the holiday weekend, have a blessed holiday, and we'll talk to you soon.